Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how one tiny part of the Tories' end-of-the-road budget yesterday seems to have created a new Brexit row within the party. Jeremy Hunt raised the threshold for paying VAT slightly for small businesses, but has said he could not do more because of EU rules. Hunt, of course, will be secretly pleased about this because the tax cuts are creating economic problems, but it seems odd to have sparked a row with his own MPs in election year. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, yesterday's budget was a very odd one for a pre-election budget. And they seem to have scored a few own goals, the Tories here. And I think one of them was along Brexit lines. In yesterday's budget, Hunt raised the threshold for businesses, small businesses paying VAT from £85,000 turnover to £90,000. And some Tory MPs were reported to be unhappy that the threshold had not been raised higher. According to an article in The Guardian, Hunt had privately told these MPs that it's because doing so would mean having a different VAT regime in Britain and Northern Ireland, thanks to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Jacob Rees-Mogg has said that it's ridiculous that our VAT policy is decided in Brussels. So well done, Mr. Hunt. You've just created a Brexit row within your own party. But shall we break down the facts in the case here, as I can understand them anyway, because there are some odd features to this. So first of all, Rees-Mogg says that our VAT policy is being decided in Brussels. There are two ways of looking at that statement. First is to say, well, we were always going to have to align some of our policies, at least, with the massive market on our doorstep, just like every economy in the world has to when they are next door to a much larger market. If you want to trade, then you want to reduce barriers to trade as much as possible. It's in your interest, which means that your policies, they're not decided in isolation. You have to be mindful of the impact of your policies on trade with that much larger market next door to you. So there's always a case for saying that the largest economies in the world decide domestic policy in smaller economies with whom they trade all over the globe. You might call it a consequence of economic gravity. It's just that before Brexit, we used to have a major say in the rules for the entire European single market. Now we don't. We just follow a lot of what they decide to do without us. But the second way of looking at Moggy's statement is that it is complete nonsense. Brussels have not decided our VAT policy. Jeremy Hunt was perfectly at liberty to raise the threshold for businesses much higher. He could have abolished it altogether, in fact, and Brussels wouldn't have said a word. Of course, he may have to then explain why the money markets crashed again, as they did when his predecessor did something equally crazy. But Brussels would no more have complained about that than they complained about Kwarteng shitting the bed. It's entirely down to us. What Hunt decided to do was to not take our VAT policy too badly out of step with the EU, because he wanted, for largely subjective reasons, to make sure that Britain and Northern Ireland were sort of similar on VAT rules. I say largely subjective. I suppose the risk of the DUP flipping their lids again, if there were to be different VAT rules in Britain and Northern Ireland, would have factored into his thinking. But also, had he raised the threshold higher, he would have had to reduce his tax cuts in other areas or raised other taxes. Although I have to say, I do find this concept of aligning Britain with Northern Ireland odd anyway, because according to The Guardian, whom I'll trust rather than, at a time I trusted rather than look it up myself. So they say, Northern Ireland Protocol says that the Brexit deal is, we cannot raise the threshold above €100,000 for VAT exemption in Northern Ireland. That is to make sure you don't gain a tax advantage by setting up a business in Northern Ireland as opposed to the Republic of Ireland. Because remember, in Northern Ireland, you're still able to export to the single market really easily. But at the current rate of exchange, raising the threshold to £90,000 puts it above €100,000. So unless I'm missing something, and it is possible, it sounds to me like there is now going to be a difference in VAT exemptions for British businesses compared to those in Northern Ireland. So there is something amiss with the reporting here. I did think, well, maybe the EU are raising their own thresholds, so that would be fine. But I checked, and the €100,000 figure still applies for the new VAT rules in the EU coming online next year. So I don't know. Perhaps Hunt just didn't want to raise the threshold more because his budget was tight enough as it was, and he just wanted an excuse. Blaming foreigners is fairly standard for Tories. But it does occur to me that what he's done is invited hardcore Brexiteers in his party to have another moan at the Northern Ireland Protocol, which, remember, is a Conservative government agreement, which was agreed when such people as, shall we see, Jacob Rees-Mogg were in the cabinet. Now, it's possible, of course, that most Tory MPs are content to move on from the extreme Tory Brexit now, as evidenced for the ready support they gave Sunak for his Windsor framework adjustments last year. But I still think it unwise for Hunt to have basically invited some backbench MPs in his own party during election year to get distracted by having a moan at the Brexit deal they negotiated several years ago, and to argue that it is preventing us implementing the tax policies that they like. After all, they may be few in number, but they tend to have platforms outside politics, for which they can push their grievances. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg is on GB News. There's at least 3 viewers for that. And this is just one example of how Jeremy Hunt, I think, delivered a budget yesterday that just seemed to annoy everyone. I mean, the reaction from the sensible quarters is it's too reckless. The IFS have made it clear as a result of this budget, whoever's in power after the election is going to have to put up taxes by quite a bit because there isn't the room to cut spending. So, it's a reckless budget. It's selling off the country's economic future for votes that it hasn't even won. And from other quarters, the more sort of the ones who like the reckless side of it, it wasn't reckless enough. It's one of those compromise situations you get in politics, which just puts everyone against you. And it also gave Labour a few easy lines as well. Today, I may talk about this in more detail in a different video, but today Starmer's pushing the line that Hunt's suggestion that national insurance should be phased out would be a bigger unfunded tax cut than the one Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng announced. Now, in reality, Hunt hasn't technically, as reported, called for the end of national insurance. He said that employee contributions should be phased out, but he also said that income tax should rise to compensate. That being said, given that the IFS say what Hunt is proposing is going to cost 40-odd billion pounds and Labour say 46 billion pounds, income tax would have to rise by about 6 or 7 pence to compensate. So good luck telling your retired voters that their income tax is going to have to massively increase in order to reduce national insurance, which they don't pay anyway. But because he just made this throwaway comment, he's made a rod for his own back. He's made an easy line of attack for Labour, and he's created a bit of a row with his own party as well. The budget itself and the presentation, they're just not what you'd expect of a government getting ready for a general election. You know, it's a budget that upsets your own side, but then is from a government with such piss-poor strategic abilities. They've not only failed to reduce the polling gap with Labour for over a year, they've actually lowered their own support. So but those will be thinking, well, hang on a minute. So what you're saying is this sounds like part one of a budget. So is this a sign of an autumn election where they intend to just wait for the fiscal headroom to increase so they can announce a mini budget in September, you know, a bit more of a tax cut, and then go to the polls in like October or something? Well, you could look at it like that. However, what I would say is consider what's popped up today in interviews. So a little while ago, Rishi Sunak said his working assumption was an election in the second half of the year. That's not a commitment. He's just saying, well, the way I'm thinking at the moment, I'm thinking second half of the year, right? Greg Hands, last week, who's a junior minister, so he speaks on behalf of the government, said there's no chance of a May election. But Jeremy Hunt, who's closer to the whole process, when he was asked today, echoed the original statement that, oh yeah, our working assumption's the second half of the year, but, you know, it's the Prime Minister who makes the decision. So he's covering himself, right? So then Rishi Sunak is asked by a journalist today, and he would not even repeat his earlier view that the second half of the year was his working assumption. He's now saying nothing about the timing. He won't even get drawn on it. He won't even repeat the line he was happy to use a few months ago. I would spend some time wondering why the further away Tory MPs are from the actual decision, the more explicit they are about election timing. But the man who actually decides is being incredibly cagey about it. More cagey than he was before. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.